I asked Annie Mashon to actually talk about these court cases. This was later, it wasn't at 2007, I think it was 2008, to talk about these court cases when she was doing talks about 9/11. And I didn't expect her to go into all the detail that we have tonight. Obviously, that's unfair to expect anyone to do that, but it's actually a very simple concept for somebody to say, Dr. Judy Wood, she's filed a court case in the USA against various contractors who helped write the NIST reports, and it's to do with how the World Trade Center was destroyed. I mean, that's what, 20 words, 25 words? There's no big words, no complication there. Anyone can report that news and then just say, well, I'm sorry, I don't know all the details, but if you go onto this website or Google it, you'll find the details for yourself. Now, I asked Annie Mashon to talk about this, and she refused. So I don't know what's going on with there, because Annie Mashon and people like her, people like Ian Henschel, for example, in the UK, claim to be interested in reinvestigating the events of 9/11, and yet they have completely censored any presentation of the facts about these court cases. So that, to me, is totally inconsistent with any desire to have a real independent investigation into the events of 9/11. And, of course, we can immediately transfer that description to the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth Group, to the recently formed scientists for 9/11 Truth Group, to the Patriots Question 9/11 Truth Group, who took Dr. Judy off their webpage at some point. I can't remember when it was. Maybe Judy can elucidate on that. So the person that's doing the most in terms of actually trying to get a result is actually not hidden. Yeah, it's hidden under the carpet. We don't want to have this person on our website. We don't want to talk to her. We don't want to look at the evidence. We don't want to know about the court case. In fact, we'd rather just say, this doesn't exist and we don't want to deal with it. Thank you very much. Next, That's essentially encapsulates the attitude that we've been essentially dealing with, shall we say, in our own way, for at least the last 4 years, really, but particularly in the last 3 years.
It's interesting to know how fast reputations end up hanging on the party line with these things, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
How can you have a controversial category within the truth movement? Surely it's all just relative anyway.
You tell me.
Yeah, it seems a bit strange, doesn't it? It alludes back to the issue you were mentioning earlier on of, if you go looking for the answer to a question, be very suspicious of answers that appear to have been left right at your feet.
Yeah, because, exactly.
If they won't swallow explanation A, then make sure explanation B's not too hard to find. And
that's right.
They'll swallow that, thinking that they've been very clever, when in actual fact a lot of this stuff's controlled responses. People use the phrase.
Absolutely. And
I just say, sometimes when I look for clues, I try to pull them in from everywhere. There's a couple of people I've gotten excellent clues from. Greg Jenkins and Stephen Jones. They're pretty good at pointing exactly where to look. You just have to look at the opposite direction of where they're pointing, 180 degrees. Because they do a good job pointing exactly 180 degrees from where you need to look.
It's in some ways then it helps you dismiss the bullshit, frankly, by looking at where certain people are pointed and then go, well, I don't have to go looking there if they're trying to get me to look there.
Then Greg Jenkins was, all the dust went down, dust went down, none of it went up, and it's all real course. And so the dust is fine and it goes up. Okay, I'll go look at that.
And I think, what we've been discussing in terms of, I particularly encountered this with the Hutchison effect, because I became, as I said earlier on, sort of involved with this phase of Dr. Judy's research in terms of the Hutchison effect. And the moment that she started talking about that on the various podcasts and the odd radio show that was being done then, in fact, we went onto a local radio station called WPFW in January 2008, so that's getting on, not long before, 3 years ago, amazingly enough. And we talked about the phenomena, with the bent metal and the levitated cars, and I made this into a DVD, and people can go onto my website, checktheevidence.com, and they can get the DVDs about this. I basically send them out for free if people haven't got any money, or just basically a donation to cover the cost of, 50 pence or £1 to cover the cost of my materials. and they can have a copy of all this information and see what they make of it. And we went on and did this presentation on the radio, and I think it was about 2 days after we did this presentation that the people who we'd formerly classed as friends, who were two characters called Jim Fetzer and Ace Baker, friends certainly in terms of supporting Dr. Judy's research. To cut a long story short, they started attacking us, saying that John Hutchison was a fraud, despite his record of evidence, which was by that time almost 20 years old. So the moment that we were attacked, almost from the point we came off air, there was this basically an orchestrated attack against John Hutchison, which became quite vicious. We were pretty. The old saying that the flat gets strongest when you're over the target. Yeah. That was additional verification, not so much from the forensic physical evidence, but from the reaction to that evidence. And I basically, I knew that Dr. Judy was on the right track before that, from January 2007, because that's when this pattern of attacks had started to really become clear, and this is when this Jenkins affair took place. And I've written basically a whole book. It's really a collection of articles over a period of about almost 3 years, 2.5 years, documenting everything in terms of how the cover-up is working. So that's really the roles that we've fallen into in terms of Dr. Judy has uncovered all this physical evidence, tons and tons of it, and I've kind of like been on the sidecar looking at all these people saying, no, it can't be that, can't be that, can't be that, going into their emails that they sent me and picking out particular phrases and reasoning that they've used and tried to dissect that. So I've kind of tried to do it as kind of an investigation of that side of things, an investigation of the actual cover-up, which we know is happening. We know that these military-industrial complex contractors helped to write the NIST reports. We know that there's a conflict of interest, and that seems to have been extended into the 9/11 Truth movement because of people essentially trying to cover those things up. In other words, it seems there is some connection between these military-industrial contractors, complex contractors, and figures within the 9/11 Truth movement. For example, we know that Steve Jones was at Los Alamos National Laboratories for a time. He makes no secret of that. Same with Colonel John Alexander, who's not particularly in the 9/11 Truth movement, but he crops up talking about UFOs and stuff like this. So all that information is on my website, checktheevidence.com. There's a free book that people can download. We've got essentially a historical archive of the last 3 to 4 years, cataloguing the development of Dr. Judy's research and how it's been essentially been covered up. That's all available for public scrutiny. The only obstacle for people is one at a time. So, that's really the thing that people can look at if they want to say, well, why is this being covered up? How has this been covered up? Why haven't I heard about the hurricane? All those sorts of questions are answered, or I hope they're answered, or attempt to answer them in the free book that's on my website.
Right. Well, I will try to remember at the wind-up of this show, and if you can mention your websites again and any relevant areas where you could direct people to go and look. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that wish they'd had a pen earlier on to write them down. So if you keep a pen and pencil handy, pen and paper handy, at the end of the show I'll try and remember to give you these websites again so you can go and look for yourself, because there is some really mind-boggling stuff out there. And we're going to go to a song again just now, and after that, if you'd like to talk more about the various pieces of obfuscation and misdirection that's been going on behind the scenes of this, because it's actually leaving a trail of rice back, as you say, the flak gets heaviest the nearer the dragon you get. So we're going to go to a song now. We'll be back with you in 5 minutes. We're from northeasttruth.me. We've also northeasttruth.com site. We've brought to you by TNSradio.com, so I must remember now to say thanks very much for all their help and cooperation. We really appreciate it. Tonight we're talking to Dr. Judy Wood, no relation, and Andrew Johnson. Before we went to the break, we'd discussed some issues. Can you just crack on straight with that?
Yeah, I mean, what we were basically talking about was how, Dr. Judy tried to bring this information forwards, and it's essentially been trashed at almost every opportunity, and that's really not much of an exaggeration. And the so-called 9/11 Truth Movement, which we've come to call the official 9/11 Truth Movement, which doesn't really want a new investigation. They're quite happy to, sing songs about get somebody else to do the investigation. But when you actually present them with any evidence, they will say they're not interested. And one particularly popular group is Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. A few of the listeners may have heard of this group. And this was started, I think, in about 2007, around about, curiously enough, I think it was almost the same day that you filed the request for correction, was it, Judy, or a week after or something?
3 weeks later.
Yeah, so it was around the time that Judy had started this legal process, and we privately have discussed, whether these two events were connected. But anyway, this group they had a press conference last week, and it was pretty insufferable, actually. They've now got billboard investigations. They proudly proclaim on their website, 9/11 Truth, that you can make a tax-deductible donation to them now. So it's essentially government affiliated.
But what that means is that they can't lobby Congress for a new investigation.
Well, there you go. So I mean, it's just we shouldn't laugh about it really, but to be honest, we've got to that point because we can't do anything else. We'd either just have crashed through the wall. We'd have crashed through the wall because we've banged our heads on it so much, or we just have to laugh. Anyway, I want to read out a little bit of a letter because we've got another chap we know. He's called Abe, and he basically joined this Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, Abraham Afiz Rodriguez, and you can go onto my website and find this letter that he sent us, because he signed up with this architects group with this petition they run. If you sign the petition, you're said to be a sort of like a member. And he wrote to them and said, I think this was about 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago. He said, have you heard about the Dr. Judy Wood's research into directed energy weapons? You should look into this. And they wrote back and said, basically, we decided to remove you from our list of petition signers because, whether you knew it or not, we have chosen to carefully limit the scope of our message to the collapse of the World Trade Center and the need for a new investigation that would specifically consider the use of explosives in bringing it down. Our message is displayed on our website in the petition and mission statement. The evidence supporting our message is also found in our website, which I'm sure you have seen since you signed our petition. Your suggestion about contacting Judy Wood and engaging in a discussion, which is what Abe suggested, with her about her theories, careful choice of word from them there, about directed energy weapons and other things, is a suggestion for action that is outside the scope of our message. We would lose more than we would gain. If nothing else, we would lose the time required to make such a contact and engage in a discussion debate whose duration would be unknown. We are also well aware of Judy Wood and her theories. The reason we don't support her or her theories is that they are outside the scope of our message. So, and it goes on a bit after that, but you can see they've got the scope of their message, but there's no mention of evidence, and there's no mention of truth. So, and there's no mention of the Keatam case, for example, and how this has been put into a legal framework. So they're basically happy to ignore all of that and lead all these other 1,000 members essentially down a blind alley.
But they were notified about the case going to the Supreme Court, and one of the members emailed it to Richard Gage and his core agents there. And they were angry and wrote back and said, we don't want to ever hear about this again. Yeah, that's right. We've got this from somebody who's involved in this group. Marshall, I am not interested in the topic of this email. Do not include me on any future emails. And this is in response to a message. Announcement is going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
It's very strange, isn't it?
It's almost, I mean, to be honest, I've written about 9/11 Truth Group, who took Dr. Judy off their webpage at some point. I can't remember when it was. Maybe Judy can elucidate on that. So the person that's doing the most in terms of actually trying to get a result is actually not
hidden.
Yeah, it's hidden under the carpet. We don't want to have this person on our website. We don't want to talk to her. We don't want to look at the evidence. We don't want to know about the court case. In fact, we was destroyed. I mean, that's what, 20 words, 25 words? There's no big words, no complication there. Anyone can report that news and then just say, well, I'm sorry, I don't know all the details, but if you go onto this website or Google it, you'll find the details for yourself. Now, I asked Annie Mashon to talk about this, and she refused. So I don't know what's going on with her, because Annie Mashon and people like her, people like Ian Henschel, for example, in the UK, claim to be interested in reinvestigating the event. We'd rather just say, this doesn't exist and we don't want to deal with it. Thank you very much. Next, That's essentially encapsulates the attitude that we've been essentially dealing with, shall we say, in our own way, for the last, at least the last 4 years, really, but particularly in the last 3 years.
It's interesting to know how fast reputations end up.
Of 9/11, and yet they have completely censored any presentation of the facts about these court cases. So that, to me, is totally inconsistent with any desire to have a real independent investigation into the events of 9/11. And of course, we can immediately transfer that description to the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth Group, to the recently formed scientists for 9/11 Truth Group, to the Patriots question. I asked Annie Mashon to actually talk about these court cases. This was later, it wasn't at 2007, I think it was 2008, to talk about these court cases when she was doing talks about 9/11. And I didn't expect her to go into all the detail that we have tonight. Obviously, that's unfair to expect anyone to do that, but it's actually a very simple concept for somebody to say, Dr. Judy Wood, she's filed a court case in the USA against various contractors who helped write the NIST reports, and it's to do with how the World Trade Center